Welcome to HCD's Mindset. I'm Michelle Nigella.
And I'm Kathryn Ambrose.
We are on a mission to help you identify what consumer science innovations have a lot of untapped value or are too good to be true.
So join us for more curious conversations as we try to make sense of the complex but fascinating world of human behavior. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Mindset. It is your favorite hosts, the two best hosts you could have imagined, Kathryn and Michelle.
Hello.
How are you doing today, Michelle?
I am doing great. It looks like you're doing great wherever you are.
Yeah. So we are pretending I'm in Vancouver right now. It was a fun trip that I actually took recently with HCD. And I'm so in love with Canada that I decided to keep it as my background. But I'm more excited about the fact that today we are joined by a really, really incredible person, a really special guest. We have on Amanda Lee. Amanda, how are you doing today?
Hi guys, I am doing great. I am so happy to be joining you guys on this vidcast. You both know that I am a huge fan of this vidcast series, so it is such an honor to be talking with you guys today.
You are definitely like one of our super fans. You interact with us on LinkedIn, as well as dropping comments. And we love it because the conversations are always wonderful. Now, Amanda, we actually already knew you before, we put out the podcast because you were actually working at HCD at one point, right?
Yes. So I interned, it feels like so long ago. It was back in 2018. So I was a research analyst intern, and it was such a great experience. That was my first time getting, real like exposure to, the methodologies and the concepts that I had been studying in school. So it was great to work with eye tracking and GSR, EKG. It was a really great experience. So, and I've kept in touch over the years. And so, I can see if I could, sneak on and join you.
How did you find HCD? I'm just curious about, is your background in something within like applied consumer neuroscience? What was your major when you were in school that brought you to find HCD?
Yeah, so I studied marketing. That was my major. I had a psychology minor, and it was through my actually cognitive psychology class that I started thinking more about, the psychology. And I kept, I thought this stuff is really great, and I really enjoy studying this. But I kept there was this feeling of that I wasn't quite getting the full picture. I felt like something was missing, and I actually took to Google and was just whatever search terms I was using, typing in, about like psychology, and it brought me to consumer neuroscience. At the time, it was the research that I was finding, it was calling it neuromarketing. So that's, I started off in this space, calling it neuromarketing, and have, switched to consumer neuroscience. But so it was through that, kind of curiosity, because what now I realize what I felt like was missing was the subconscious, that, what participants can't necessarily tell us. So things like the eye tracking, coupled with the, GSR and the EKG, to give really that like complete picture. And the reason that I felt so strongly about there being subconscious influences or drivers, I had like an experience where my mom brought me two different face washes from, it was like CVS going out of business, something like that. And I didn't recognize either brand, and neither package really stood out to me in any way. And I don't even recall reading any of the messaging like on the bottle. But I had both of them laying next to each other on the sink. I picked up the first one. I looked at it for just a few seconds and then put it down and grabbed the other one. And I thought to myself, why did I do that? Because nothing about either package stood out to me. I can't consciously tell you the reason I did that. And so it's things like that I started noticing. And I'm like, I think there's more to maybe, there's consumer psychology, but I think there's more. And like, how do we measure what that is. So that led me to really get into the consumer neuroscience space. And I found HCD actually on a list of companies that do consumer neuroscience. Roger Dooley had posted this list. So you guys are on it. You made the list. So I actually just knocked on doors when I graduated college and was just, sending out shot in the dark messages. And I was thrilled that HCD responded. And it's just been, it was a great journey. I moved to kind of middle of nowhere, New Jersey. Lived there for a few months while I did the internship, but it was honestly a really good experience all around. So that's how I found HCD. And actually, Glenn is hilarious. I don't know if you guys, he's been on the show.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
The first call that I had with Glenn, he had missed the call, and he calls me back a few minutes later and tells me, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I was late. I was saving like kittens from a burning building." And that was like my first interaction with Glenn.
That sounds about right.
Yes. Glenn, our fearless leader.
Yeah.
And now I met you as you were an intern, and you were working with the analysts, and the analysts are basically, doing all the stats to produce the reports that go to the clients. But you had a slightly different interest than just the analytics. I mean, of course, there's definitely importance in that and understanding how to, really do the measurements and do the math. But you were interested in something just a little bit further. And so you and I started meeting. Now you've reached out to me and said, "Hey, can I set up a meeting?" I remember this.
Yes. So one of the pivotal things that we talked about, it was so helpful to go to HCD because prior to having that internship, I did not have any contacts to reach out to. My school did not have a program in consumer neuroscience. And I know, not many schools do, but more are starting to have programs like that. But it's usually a master's degree or higher education degree, with a specific interest in that. But I asked some of my professors, my marketing, my psychology, and my neuroscience professors, if they had any knowledge of this applied neuroscience to marketing field, and they all said no. So it was so exciting for me to actually have someone to talk to, and even still today. I think because for so long I really studied it on my own, so independently, I still get extremely jazzed when I get to talk shop with people.
So that's really interesting. You mentioned how you do a lot of independent research into the field of applied consumer neuroscience, and that is very admirable because, as we've chatted on this podcast, there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of really snazzy titles that aren't actually rooted in truth. Yep, there's buzzwords. Yeah. So what was that like for you as you were trying to cut through the mess of, especially back in 2018, and still today, there's just a lot of noise when you're trying to find really valuable research and valuable insights. What are some of the tips that you would give to people, but also what was your experience like?
Yeah, it was definitely challenging. That was kind of the main sticking point for me. I feel like at that point in my journey. So and Michelle and I had talked about this, but and you guys had that neuro whack-a-mole where you're debunking all these myths, which I have to admit, I fell for a lot of those kind of myths when I was studying it on my own. So I feel like one of the first things that I saw when I started researching this is what we all know and hate, the 90% of decisions are driven by these subconscious influences or drivers, and I've even seen stats that say 95%. So I definitely was like, wow, oh my gosh, that's amazing. I felt like I was sitting on this gold mine of information.
Yeah, when you were describing this to me, so we went to lunch. And, you were talking about, and you were so excited about it,
So
about,
excited.
this 90% or this 95%. And, I was like, that's bullshit. And it was like, I didn't mean to like suck the life out of you. But you were talking about it being like a very, like a turning point, right? So can you describe what you mean by that?
Yeah, that was a really pivotal moment for me. And I'm so glad that you told me, because your advice was that I, need to be think critically about what you're reading. You had said that, well, how would we measure if something was driven by this subconscious influence? Like how would you measure that? And that was definitely something that like made me pause and think. I will say that, it's funny you said you didn't mean to suck the life out of me. I'm so glad you said it, because I always want, to know, what's factual. Like I want to know the reality. And it is funny because it did in that moment, like I did feel like a little devastated because I felt, I was like, oh my gosh, I spent the past 2 years, studying this area kind of like under like a false pretense. And it turned out that I was worrying for nothing. Everything that I studied was, it was
Still
legitimate,
valuable.
but I had to change how I was thinking about
Yes.
the area, because I'm thinking, well, why isn't everyone doing this? Like 90%, like that speaks for itself. I don't understand why everyone's doing that. And I want to say too, one thing that I think is important to distinguish is like I said earlier, I do believe that a lot of our decisions are driven by subconscious influences. The only thing I would be hesitant to say is just to put a number next to it, because I don't know what that percentage would be. I don't know if we can know. But the whole reason I got into this field is because I was noticing like there's something going on that I can't explain myself. So I don't have a problem with saying that there are subconscious influences like at work. I just wouldn't put a number next to it. But
I
the other
think that's
thing,
really interesting. I do want to pause right there and just dive into that a bit, because when you say there's a subconscious influence, what I do as a researcher is I immediately go, well, we should define what we mean by a subconscious influence. And in my eyes, when I hear subconscious influence, I think about all the different characteristics that make up our environment that are influencing that subconscious influence, so that
Like if we think
perception.
about those bottles you have,
Yes.
right? It could be the colors, it could be the messaging that you didn't realize you actually got, but you did. It could be the weight of the bottles, the shape, the texture. These were all cues for you that signal some higher order benefit, right? That this one is higher quality, or that it's more reliable, or that it's more familiar. You know what it's going to do. You can trust it. And so yes, those things can certainly be non-conscious or subconscious. I think we can all agree with that. But yeah, the problem ends up being, well, when people say that they're actually measuring the subconscious. We had a conversation just earlier today where we were talking about fMRI, and or actually just before this call, you and I were talking about fMRI, and the problem is that it is very good at being very academic. It can show you exactly the activity going on in the brain, but it doesn't mean that the person isn't consciously aware, right? So some of these studies that are identifying that someone had seen this word before, and then when we show them the word again, it shows up on the fMRI scan. Well, the person could also have just told you, and you could have saved yourself $6 million by just asking them, right? But of course, you wouldn't then have a better understanding the way the brain works, understanding that this particular location in the brain is activated, or that there are these timing effects, or whatever it might be. So academically, very interesting. When it comes to like practicality, you could just ask the person, right?
Right.
But sorry, you're going to say there was a second reason, a second thing that really struck you as important in your sort of journey.
Yeah, I was going to say that the other kind of neuro myth that I fell for. And I really look back and laugh because, when you're first starting out, it's so much information and it's hard to process. And I think because the area is so new, and at that time I didn't have much understanding of neuroscience. So I was definitely more, I guess, gullible. But one of the things that I remember so clearly, writing a blog for my university's like chapter of the AMA, one that was like, it was a blog that was available to students. And oh gosh, guys, I cringe because I actually like said in there something about like comparing it to mind reading, guys. Oh, listen,
You wouldn't be the
hope
first.
yeah,
You're
I
not
hope
yeah,
that
you're
blog
okay.
is like buried deep somewhere within like the depths of like,
The internet
this
never
black hole of
forgets.
the internet, like never to be unearthed again.
It just makes you a true researcher, because
You
retractions
evolve.
and revisions is part of why we have hypotheses.
Yeah.
A
So
scientist
don't
learns
feel-
more. It's never definitive.
Yeah.
It's always evolving.
Yeah. But I would say too that even that blog, it served a purpose for me because it got me like really excited and
Yeah.
it got me writing about what I was learning too.
Yeah.
Whether it be the most factual or not, it served a purpose in getting me where I am, because now I love to, write about what I've been reading. But so embarrassing, but
But your evolution is so important on this, and it is important for people to hear, because there are a lot of people in industry that have, top paying jobs that don't have the time to learn, right? And so a lot of these really buzzworthy statements like mind reading and 90%, all these things are almost like by design stated in such a way to be convincing, right? So one of the things that we talk about from time to time is design fiction, right? We know that there is, there's a lot of technology development happening in neuroscience, a lot of knowledge being acquired, and a lot of really great progress in understanding, how the mind works. And so when somebody comes forward and says, look, we have all this technology, we can read people's minds, it sounds plausible, right? It's just plausible enough to say, that would be really interesting and exciting. And maybe that is the case. And it also sounds very useful. So we want to believe in that. We come across clients all the time that have heard these things and it makes sense to them, right? And it would be very great if it worked out that way. So it's very believable. And I think that a lot of the, neuromarketing companies capitalize on that slight believability that these statements have. So you're certainly not alone, but where you have the advantage is that you've taken a moment to think critically about it and that you want to take this forward into your career. And I think that that's really valuable for other people to see insight into. So you talk about a lot of this independent study that you're doing. What are some of the resources that you think have been most important in developing yourself as a consumer neuroscientist?
Yeah, I've used like a wide range of resources. I would say that I started out I took a cognitive process class, like I mentioned, and then a foundations of behavioral neuroscience. So those two like textbooks, like started the very base of it. Then I read Neuromarketing for Dummies. And I thought that was a really great intro. It covered like a wide range of
Steven's
topics.
great. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a great resource. Then I started to kind of make my way into more, kind of some more research, kind of more academic research focused books. I read The Seven Sins of Memory, which I mentioned to Michelle earlier. I highly, highly recommend that book. It does talk about, it's a little more like academic studies focus, but the memory concepts apply to consumer products as well. Then I've done the Thinking Fast and Slow. That's the as Michelle would say, the Church of Kahneman. So
but a good one to actually read.
Yes.
And bring up, because a lot of people in the field, they quote it but don't actually read it. So I think there's really something valuable you have there.
Right. Yep. Then I also do a lot of LinkedIn learning courses. And so Michelle and I talked, we're actually going to drop in the notes below some of the books and some of the courses that I've taken that I would recommend. But then the other thing that I think was really helpful, I started attending like webinars that the different like, consumer neuroscience companies were hosting. It's a lot of good information. And some of them you get to see like actual, like kind of live demos. That was really helpful. And, I would also mention too that iMotions software, platforms. Actually, if you go to their website, they have great information on the different methodologies, like how it's used, why it's used, like how you track it, what the results look like. So that was really helpful. It's been, kind of a culmination of all of those things. And then of course, talking with people in the industry. So I've had the like really great pleasure to talk with many people in the industry, actually, even people like across the world. Like I spoke with someone recently from the United Kingdom, and it's just so cool to have these opportunities. It makes a big world
community.
Small.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, you have been doing work as a consultant as well, sort of bringing this knowledge that you've been able to develop over time to help people with their brand. So how do you see consumer neuroscience being able to help people? So what are you offering beyond what the typical marketing consultant might do to really help people have an effective, connection with their consumers?
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we're discussing, and it's actually something I read in Predictably Irrational. That's one of the books that I've read as well. But they talk about like choice architecture. So if you're, if you have 3 different size bottles of mead, because I consult for a meadery. So when you're really looking to sell like, the middle size, then you've got, you can buy price and maybe what you pair with the item, you can really influence, like kind of a hint to nudging as well. Right. Yeah. So which I know you guys love to talk about. So influence, which bottle like a consumer might purchase. That's one thing. Really what we're doing with Blackheath right now is a lot of kind of just market research, like fundamentals. But I always say that they're going back to the basics is never a bad thing. Go back to the basics and show you can master those skills and you can build upon that. So we're doing a lot of promotional work. We're doing social media. We're partnering with local businesses, doing product collaboration. So we're actually have our big 8-year anniversary celebration coming up this Saturday. And we are partnering with a distillery. And so we're making a cocktail with our mead. So we're really, honestly, it's about building relationships. And I do primary research there too. It's a little more informal because it's not your set focus group style. So it's me sitting with customers, I call it boozing and schmoozing.
I love that. And I think what you've shared is something that is really important, that you don't need all the machinery. It's not a necessity to have biometrics for every single study. You don't necessarily need it for every single study. And there's something to be said for behavioral data that you can get from pulling from social media. What are people engaging with? What are people, looking at, and pairing that with, when you're boozing and schmoozing with, with those little tidbits of information you're actually getting from the people.
You're getting contextual information as well. That's straight from their own mouth, right? So in the words they would use to describe, and that can be a really important way to connect with people by using their own language, right? And so I think you're doing something really great there, and we'd love to maybe even see an update, or maybe, if you wanted to write up a case study, maybe it's something that we could even, share and with the listeners who have heard us talk about it, so it might be really interesting to see, what you've done and what you've learned in that.
Oh yeah, that would be great. And I can tell you that talking with the customers, I have learned so much about what they're looking for. They've given me so many ideas about, I'd love to see food here, and mead has a lot of great food pairings, just like wine. So we're looking into, there's so many things that we're looking into. One customer was like, I love the designs, your labels, like those, they actually have a really awesome graphic graphic designer. So they're like, can I get that like in a poster size? Like, and they actually have a completely different clientele than I've ever worked with before. And it's so fascinating. I would say their clientele is very eclectic, like Dungeons and Dragons,
Yeah, it's a
like
meadery, so
Game
yeah.
of Thrones gamers, but
Yeah.
also like music lovers and like
Yeah.
EDM. It's fascinating
And
because
they have their own language to
they
describe
do.
it too. Yeah.
And I came from healthcare. I did. I worked in healthcare with you guys, but also there was a consumer almond milk brand that we worked with as well. So, but then I went on to work in healthcare past HCD. So I have to say, I love the food and beverage industry. I love CPG, and it's actually something really funny that we're doing for their 8-year anniversary. We are creating QR codes to get more people to follow their social media. And so I asked the client, I said, Bill, how much fun can I have with this? And he's like, oh, you can do whatever you want. And so literally we are making a little small sign. It's going to say, taking a poo in the loo, check out our social media pages. Everyone pulls out their phone in the bathroom.
That's so, and honestly, again, that goes back to understanding, it sounds silly, but understanding consumer habits and consumer behavior. You are intuitively, that what are people doing, that they pull out their phone because it's their people need their phone, they're addicted to it. But when you're out with your friends, you're thinking to yourself, you're like, oh, I'm going to take a pause, go to the bathroom. And it's a time for you to collect yourself. And part of collecting yourself as a consumer nowadays is looking at your phone. So by you pairing those two things together, you're creating a more seamless experience for the consumer to actually go and explore further what's happening on the social media pages and getting people to interact more, even if it's in a space that's less
glamorous. No, I think that's great. I think you're doing some awesome work there, and I'm sure that it's going to be really appreciated. Now, do you have any words of advice for people? Maybe they're already in industry, but they're interested in learning more. You've mentioned some books, but what are some other ways, even students coming out of school, what do you recommend as first steps?
Yeah, I think it would definitely be different for someone that has no or maybe very little psychology and neuroscience, base, because I at least, took those 2 classes that I found really helpful. So I haven't really looked into YouTube much, but I do know, like, I've used YouTube for things unrelated to consumer neuroscience. And I do always find videos on there that are helpful, that are like breaking things down into very simple terms. Like that might be a place to look. But that's an interesting idea. I don't know. Kathryn, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I will shamelessly plug a really fabulous podcast I know of called MindSet.
Yes, podcast.
But one thing, and I think you actually touched on this earlier, which is a really great resource that I honestly didn't know about leaving undergrad, is the idea of white papers, because white papers are intended to be understood for the layperson, understood for anybody. And so it's really great because it takes really complex topics and breaks them down simply. So by finding reputable vendors or different companies that have white papers that they offer, one, they're usually free, and two, like I said, it makes really complex topics digestible and easier to understand. And I think that would be a really great first step in just getting those fundamentals, learning definitions, things along those lines would be a great place to start.
Yeah. I think some of the pop sci books that you were talking about, the predictably irrational type things, they're a good resource too, because they spark the original interest, while they are full of, fluff. Right. So there's definitely some overreaching conclusions they have on some of the studies, or they make it sound a lot more convincing than it really is. it's a starting point. And from there, you can start to learn the terminology and learn the equipment a little bit more and start to think a little bit more critically about it. And then you can start questioning. A lot of people start with, like the tipping point or the Michael Gladwell stuff, right? About Malcolm Gladwell, right? But a lot of that is very fluff and not always very true to the science, but it's a good starting point because it is very exciting and it's described in a way that is interesting and easy to digest. So I kind of recommend doing that because it's a lot more fun than reading the academic papers, at least at first, right? Because later on, when you get used to it, you can read the academic paper and it's going to be a lot more digestible. But yeah, that, and I really like the podcast, The Hidden Brain. I think that is a really fun one as well.
Yeah.
But I think we need to get to the quiz for you.
Yes, it is time to do our favorite segment where we are going to ask you. I have 10 words, random words written out, ready to go. And basically, we're just going to do our react attack game. I know that you know the game since you are one of our favorite listeners, yes. But because other people may not know, basically, I just have 10 words. I'm going to list them off, and then you're just going to say the first thing that comes to your head. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just a fun way to find out what your associations are at this point in time with these words.
This is what I was most nervous for, because I'm thinking, what if they give me the word brain and like the first thing that comes to my mind is like nachos. They're going to be like, what's going on in her head?
That would be the most interesting answer we ever got.
So Amanda, are you ready to get started?
I am ready.
Okay. So the first word, publications.
Academia.
Emotions.
Highly sensitive.
Learning.
Oh, love.
Consulting.
Fun.
Neuromarketing.
I want to say buzzword.
Consumers.
Need some direction. Sorry if that's more than one word, but
that's okay.
The bathroom.
A place to put social media QR codes.
Educational courses.
Essential.
Critical thinking.
I want to say also essential. Especially in this field, also very, very essential.
Okay, and we're at the last one. Neuromyths.
Easy to fall for.
Honestly, that's fair.
Sometimes believable.
Yeah. Believable is a good word for that.
Yeah.
And that's why we have to keep learning and be critical thinkers. I think it all really does tie in, but we've really enjoyed chatting with you.
And Amanda, I do just want to say, I really commend you on your interest in learning. I love it. And I think it's wonderful.
Thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure, guys. I have so enjoyed this. This has been something I've wanted to do. So it's just such an honor for me to talk with you. So
I think this is a really fun conversation. Much. And I think that people will find a lot of utility out of, seeing a little bit about what you're doing, but also how the journey can help them on their own journey. And as Kathryn would usually say at this point, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
So I use LinkedIn regularly. I basically live on LinkedIn. So you can absolutely message me there. You can email me. I have a really long email, so we can drop that in the details below. But it's my full name. So Amanda Elizabeth Lee 1204@gmail.com. And it has to be so long because there are so many Amanda Lees. Every time I go to sign up for anything, there are so many Amanda Lees. So,
but we're happy to have you as our Amanda Lee on the show.
You're our first Amanda Lee.
I would definitely tell people, I love, like I said earlier, to talk shop. Please reach out if you're interested in talking about anything consumer neuroscience related. I love meeting new people and hearing what other people are up to. So please reach out. Don't hesitate.
Well, I can't wait to hear what you'll be up to next. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys. Thanks so much.
For more information or updates, follow HCD Research on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter at HCD Research Inc. and at HCD Neuroscience. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and be sure to rate, review, and follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you and stay tuned for more curious conversations.